Welcome to the show today. Today I have Vladimir Mijatovic on the show, and he's the head of product management for software and digital services at Bystronic. I'm very happy to have you here and dive a little bit into your story and what you've been up to so far. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me, and
So
I'm
that's
happy to be here.
great. So let's dive right into your story. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what sort of the story that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I am originally from Serbia, and then as a very young engineer, I moved to Finland when Nokia was a really big company and doing all kinds of cool projects. So I started my career, my professional career there, and also my development as from like it's education and university to a professional and more to a career. I think this has been somewhat a turning point in my life. I moved to a new country. I get to know so many people, started working in very, very international and very dynamic and modern and progressive environment. I stayed in Finland for 10 years. Then I moved to Switzerland because my wife got a job here, so we moved as a family. And then we have been for a number of years also in Switzerland. And I have worked in big companies and small companies, and now again in big company in Bystronic, where I'm responsible for software and digital services.
Great. Thanks for the intro. So let's dive right in, with the conversation about digital innovation. So the first question is basically, where does the human fit into all of this innovation piece? First of all, like, how important is it in your perspective that the human is in the center of innovation, and then how do we actually go about putting the human in the center of digital innovation?
Oh, that's a good question. I think very often the innovation doesn't start from a human standpoint. Innovation very often starts from a standpoint, there's a piece of technology or there's a piece of like really cool idea. Let's see what we can do with that. And then you dive into that direction and somehow you get into a tunnel vision. I want to see this through, right? This happens all the time. I think this is not the right way to go. Sometimes you kind of come up to something really good, but more often than not, I would say 95%, 99% of the cases, you need to start with human. So what has been working very well for me, and I think this has been also from my past experience of changing countries and changing environments, I think I have become much more empathic person. I could understand my environment and feel people better. And this has been one of the key advantages. You always start with how would that person feel if, and then you spend a lot of time as a project team or as a kind of couple of people who develop the idea, you spend a lot of time understanding what would this user feel if, how does it feel today, what is frustrating him, why is it frustrating him. One of the very interesting stories was that when we were in Finland and we have put our kid in kindergarten, and she was born there and she, spending first year at home, she didn't speak the Finnish language. So she was put in a kindergarten where she didn't know the language or people. Okay. What's interesting for the teachers, they have been all sent to the training where the teachers are put for the whole day in a classroom, which is taught in a language they don't understand. And so the reason why they do that is that you get this feeling, how does it feel that you are in the room as a kid that doesn't understand a thing, right? And so this builds your empathy, this builds your understanding what the other person's problem is. That's how you should start solving the problem. That's how you should start build the technology or service or product. Feel the problem, understand the problem, look it from different angles, and then only start with what the solution could be.
That's a great story. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you sharing that. And also, that the point about starting with the human, I feel like it's clear for most people that this is important, but then it's very difficult, or there's a gap actually very often, right? The gap in reality and what we think we actually should be doing, right? And I find it interesting with what you said is we get started with it and then we develop this tunnel vision. And then it's not that easy to get out of it and actually take a step back. Because once you're in it, it's very difficult to see outside of it. And it's a very interesting point that you made there, because the motivation becomes, I want to finish it. The
Yes.
motivation becomes, I want to just see it through. I want to complete the project. And that's not the purpose of a project, is not to necessarily complete the project. Sometimes it may actually be okay to not complete the project or trash it along the way, because at some point maybe it doesn't make any sense anymore. So the purpose of a project should not necessarily be to finish it, right? It should actually be, doing it right, or doing the right thing in a sense. So I really like the point that you made there, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into digital products or services, basically, because you very much come from that perspective. And my question there is, like, in your perspective, what makes a digital product or a digital service succeed or fail? Or even what criteria do you have for success and failure to measure it? And what are some of the criteria that make them succeed or fail?
I mean, thanks for that. That's a great question. Of course, it's natural for everyone once they start into the project to want to finish it. That's partially because I think that's how we humans are. You have this perseverance or this stubbornness to finish something when you start it. That's number one. That's a first failure. Second is that you don't really want, especially in a big company environment, but also in startup, you don't want to lose face. You have to admit that your initial set of thoughts and assumptions were not right, or were not completely right. That's not a failure, and I think this is what makes us human. Nobody's immune to that. But what you need to do is that when you're starting the service, I think really good idea is that you start as early as you can. Bring the MVP to customers. Bring it as early as you can. It doesn't matter where you start if your iteration towards product market fit is nice and iterative and constant. But what you really want to do, you want to bring your service to customers, and then you ask them, okay, what do you think about this service? And then use that feedback, use that empathy that you feel or have built with customers. And if you're also good, you also use this service yourself. And then you start understanding how do they feel about it, and what are their actual needs, and what are the needs you thought they have a month ago. Because I can guarantee you, this is 100%, it always amazes me, whatever we launch, how much we were wrong before the launch, and how much actual our assumptions were not spot on once the customer starts using product. And this is always amazing, and this is always fantastic learning, that you see that, oh, okay, we forgot about that. And then how could we have been so blind? Why we didn't think about it? But you can't, because you have this tunnel vision, you think in your own way. And only when you start getting the feedback from the customers, you can understand what is the next thing you need to do. So, I mean, the advice is that always ask customers, be in close contact, especially in early phases. Make sure that you get this input into your product development or service development cycle. And then also one good thing that worked very well for me in the past, you build a small set, but there's something that we call wow moments, something that your customer gets like a rush of dopamine, if you like, a pleasure of feeling something unusual and nice in experiencing your product. Pretty much like when you approach the Tesla car, it kind of wakes up to you and opens up the door handles. It's a nice touch. It's not necessary, but it gives you this emotional wow moment, and that makes you really love this service.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I mean, on the one side, of course, the very close relationship with the customers, going very early to the customers. And I find it interesting because, you know, it kind of sounds simple, but then it's not necessarily easy because there's a lot of stuff that could get in the way, right? I mean, one thing is maybe also the fear of feedback, quite honestly, right? I mean, you know, what if we have assumptions and we are very attached to these assumptions, and then they're completely wrong? How do we then go maybe to the, you know, to the boss or to the board or whatever, and we talk about that? I find it's interesting because there's quite a few roadblocks also in the simplicity of it. It's so simple. It's just like, just do it, right? But then there may be some roadblocks that are not that easy to overcome because they tend to be very emotional or very personal sometimes as well.
Yes. And yes, and this is absolutely true, and it comes from this dynamics that you have in your company, with your peers, with your boss, with your team. What do you take off if your customer tells you something you don't want to hear? And who is to blame in these circumstances? Is there anybody to blame, and who? Okay, and I think this is exactly the culture you don't want to have in your team and you don't want to have in your company, but it happens all the time. So you rather not ask users, you rather not ask for feedback, because the fear of hearing something that you don't want to hear and fear of being blamed is bigger than the reward of actually doing the right thing, maybe adjusting, maybe pivoting, maybe rethinking your concept. And so, you know, what's important is, and the larger the company, more important it is. I think the role of the leadership in the companies and lot of team leaders is to create this atmosphere where the feedback from the customer is super important, and the learnings that you get from these workshops and feedbacks and similar are actually what drives your iteration, and not the wise guys who are sitting back in the office, but rather the KPIs, the feedback you're receiving, and this is what you take as an input. All right, and that's the art of product management, to balance what you have learned from your previous experiences, the innovation that you can bring from either your previous experiences or some additional ideas, and the feedback that you're getting from the customers or what they feel about the service right now. And that's those are the ingredients for your soup, and how you cook it, it's up to you. But these things you have to keep in.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It actually brings me to my next point about stakeholders, dealing with different stakeholders. Because just like this morning, I had a call with a client, and we're talking about, you know, a range of applications basically that they have, and integrating, you know, because it makes the most sense from a customer perspective, you know, and it just makes total sense. And the feedback is also like, this is exactly how it should be. And then the other side was, it just doesn't fit into our strategic perspective or into our strategic plan. And it's very interesting, right? I mean, you know, customer centric, user centric, okay, yes. But then there may also be another perspective. So how do you deal when you have different stakeholders? How do you deal with different stakeholder needs, different stakeholder goals? How do you deal with that soup?
So this is a great question. I think the one who answers it from the product management point of view creates a great course on stakeholder management. He's going to be a millionaire. There's no perfect answer, that's for sure. The one thing that works really well, and I have seen it over and over and over again, data trumps anything else. So if you have right data, nobody can tell you anything really. You know, you can argue whether customer likes certain things or not before you actually ask the customer. Once you ask them, you can't argue about that anymore. You know it for a fact. You could then adjust your question. Did we ask right subset of customers? Did we stratify them or take a random sample the way we wanted to? But if you ask, you know, if you have a restaurant and you ask 10 of your customer, how do you like the food? And 9 of them said, it wasn't good. You cannot say there is no discussion anymore. Is your food good or not? No, it's not, because your customers say to you it is not. Okay. And so this is, I think, one advice that I've trying to put into the brain of all of my more junior product managers in my team. Go to customers, call them on the phone one by one if you like, send them questionnaire, look into the NPS survey, understand what they say about this service. Once you have talked to 5 or 10 customers, nobody knows better than you what they think. And then once you know that, this is a great ammunition and great starting point for stakeholder management, because you move from opinion to data. Okay. And so that's one thing. And then the second is that it is great that you, by managing your stakeholders, I think you need to provide them some kind of a trust environment. So both of your peers or your superiors, like management or somebody in your team or in other teams, you have to provide this trust that they can rely on you, you can rely on them. So there's a mutual trust and understanding. That makes it much easier that's a necessary starting point. You have to have that. Without that, it's not going to work. And then the second is that you need to provide the vision, where you want to go. What do you want to take this product or service? What do you want it to be? How great would it be if, and in 2025, what is going to happen, and similar. So they feel this, they hail this inspiration that you want to send. And then what you also want to do, you want to capitalize on early successes or on, let's say, a prototype that you're having. A prototype is way better than PowerPoint presentation. A feedback from a customer on a prototype you can get in a matter of a day or two, and it's 10 times better than any argument you may construct on the meeting. And these things are real. These things are data you use to manage stakeholders. And then you just rinse and repeat. So you spend enough time and things will start work your way.
I love that. I love the point about a prototype is a lot better than a slide deck. It has just so much more power.
Absolutely.
It's so true. And, it's a whole other section, I would say, about talk about management buy-in, but we don't necessarily have to go into details because there's some other things I want to talk about. But what I find interesting about, what you talked about, the data, basically, it's really hard to argue with data. That is so true. And then also when you have the data, and the thing is, maybe you have the data, but the decision will still be in the other direction. But I always feel like then it's almost like, it's maybe not perfect, but it's more okay then, because I think there's an understanding more of the implications.
Correct.
Because if you have data and the decision goes against the data, that's okay, because I assume then you understand the implications if you go against it.
Correct.
And then it's a more conscious decision, basically, than making decisions based on assumptions, so to say.
Correct.
So that's a really, really good one. And I want to talk about leadership a little bit, but not just the concept of leadership, but a little bit more in detail when it comes to change, basically. So, change may be a new innovation, maybe a organizational change or whatever it may be. So when there's change happening, how do you get people on board? How do you get people excited? How do you get people on board? How do you get people motivated to actually come together to join that change, so to say?
So in a way, it's a similar story to stakeholder management, right? So there is a change, and changes are always, always, always painful, because it demands you to move from a comfort zone, from your sofa, and you need to jump in the unknown, right? This is how it feels. Everyone feels a little bit, even a little bit unconsciously, but threatened by changing their own known for the unknown. That's what change is. So what you want to do is that to manage the change, first you need to have this empathy with the people around you. So you need to understand, and you need to be able to communicate to them, why do you want to change? So starting with why is a cliche, but you really need to understand, okay, why would I change in the first place? And you need to understand your subset of your people or subset of your customers. Why would you want to change? What is in it for me? And more you have worked on building trust before, the easier it's going to be for you. So you wouldn't want to paint this picture of why there is better than here, and how does it feel being there? How would you do your job or go around your life when being there? How would it feel? How would you interact with others? And so that the person understands that, well, over there it's actually better. It's not so bad. Not only it's not so bad, it's better, you know. And then what you want is also that you want to have focus on those early adopters, on people who are adopting the change. You always have early adopters. You always have people who are more eager to try new things. Maybe they are pioneers. Maybe they are some visionaries. Maybe they're just curious, okay? So you want to put more focus on them. You want to identify them, and you want to amplify their success. You want to make it visible. Yes, they are there. Maybe they're using new tool. Maybe they're using new process. Maybe they have learned new skill. And by that, they have been so much more successful and so much more happy. You know, it's well known how do you manage change when you're launching a new product on the market for consumer products. You have a new drink, and you really want to have the influencers or influential people being seen drinking a new drink, because then everybody wants to do the same. People are like that. They want to follow and they want to repeat what inspirational individuals are doing. Okay, so your only job is that you say, hey, over there is better, and then somehow that make visible people who are on that journey how much they enjoy it, and then the rest will follow. And this is how you manage change. So very consciously trying to understand who are those influencers in your network that you want to focus on. You focus on them, make them visible, and then communicate further the message. Yeah, over there is great. And that's what you need to do. And then people will follow. That this why is clear, and they will do that. They will do the leap.
I love the simplicity in it, because, like, just to recap, what I heard is basically, I mean, step one is paint the picture of the future. Step two is identify the early, the innovators and early adopters, right? And then get them over there if they're not already over there. And then step three is basically celebrate them, make it visible. Correct. What they're doing, celebrate them, communicate with them, make them your ambassadors if they're not already are.
Correct.
And instead of you necessarily pushing the others, let the early adopters and innovators inspire them to come along. Not everybody may come along, which is normal, right? But the ones who have a chance to come along, let them come along, but not by pushing, but by pulling. I love that.
I think there is nothing worse. I don't know if you worked in big companies, but there is nothing worse than an email from HR explaining the new organization change. Because the first feeling you have, oh my God, I'm losing the job. Second feeling is that this is not going to work. And the third feeling is that I don't care. And so when you receive it from email or from some leadership, and then there might be a link to an internet page, that's not enough. This is almost like them challenging you or making your life more difficult. But if I were to see that one of my peers is having great new training on, let's say, new leadership style, or great new training on new go-to-market approach, and it's exclusive only to some people, then I want to be in. I want to be part of that. The scarcity and exclusivity is something that drives us. So reading an email from HR, you must be there by X and X, and you must read this and complete this training. No, I will do it, but I will hate it. If I see the colleague that I really like doing that, that's a different story. Then I would really go along. and I would with passion, with desire, you know, and that the passion and the kind of motivation is number one ingredient in learning and changing.
Yeah, I love that. I love that very specific example because it's a good one and it's a very real one. And there's one more thing I want to talk about as part of leadership for change is, okay, you've got people on board, get it started, it's going well, and then it's going less well, and then things get more expensive and take longer, and things go off track, and all the stuff that just happens. How do you keep people engaged along the way? How can you keep people motivated along the way to not fall off the wagon?
Oh my, it's a good question. Okay, so the it follows to some extent. Maybe I repeat what I said. You know, the every journey is difficult in so many ways, and in the beginning of the journey, you cannot predict all the twists and turns. You will not know what tomorrow brings. You know, the beginning of 2020, we have a bunch of ideas, and then it came Corona, and so we could have continued this path, or what we did a lot of changes in order to adopt, which we didn't know beforehand, right? And now, how do you keep people inspired? I mean, along the way, there will be those difficulties, and what you want to have by that time, you want to have in your team and in your peers this team spirit. Again, it's a cliche, but it's true. You want to have highly performing, highly functioning team with having this psychological safety internally, understanding that yes, we're in this together. Yes, there are challenges here and there, and you want to communicate very transparently and communicate with authenticity, to be authentic when you're saying, oh, this is a problem, I don't understand, I don't know how to deal with it, but we'll get through it. Remember, where we want to be is here, and this is why you want to be here. And so if you try to minimize the problem or try to ignore it, it's not going to disappear. It will just, and the other people are not stupid, they know it's there. So you can't minimize, you have to stay authentic, and you have to keep on communicating the desire and the vision why you want to be here. The vision is what drives people and not what you tell them to do.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point about the journey. And just what came to mind as well is about topic of expectations. Mm-hmm. Because usually or quite often how I'm seeing it is like, you know, Vision 2025, right? And everything is, you know, flowers and butterflies and everybody's hugging each other and it's awesome. And the journey there almost feels like that as well as an expectation. And I just find it interesting what happens if you paint that vision, but then you put it in comparison to the journey and basically truly authentically say, this is not going to be easy. You know, this is actually going to be challenging. It's going to be hard. There's going to be failures along the way. It's Correct. Going to be difficult. Not everybody's going to make it. And we don't even know if we're actually going to, get exactly to that point because things may change along the way. And, I mean, maybe you're not communicating exactly like that, but just this comparison as well to the actual journey, I find that interesting because I think the expectation of the outcome or the vision, that's great. That should be very positive, should be very, very bright, and should inspire hope and should inspire loyalty and all these great things. But then the journey should also do that, but it can only do that if it's realistic. And because if the expectation is it's going to be flowers and butterflies for the next 5 years, and then 2 weeks later it's like basically we're in the darkness now, and nothing feels great, it just feels like a dark cave. That's very, very difficult, right?
Correct. So to continue on that, I mean, the great analogy is that let's say you want to build a great rock band, okay, and you start with a couple of young guys who don't know how to play instruments, okay, and so you have this journey, a really hard one, where they need to learn the notes, they need to learn the guitar grips, they need to learn the all kinds of tools and techniques, how to play guitar really well. they'll make a lot of mistakes along the way. And so your job is, if you want to make this band from total beginners to a world class, your job is to be a servant leader. So you cannot expect them not to fail, because that's not the way to learn. You can't learn guitar without making mistakes. Nobody can. And so there's this illusion that you can, in a company, you can get to a place where you want to be without making mistakes. Nobody can. And so what your job is as a leader of this team, to create this atmosphere where people want to make mistakes and they want to practice all the time, because that gets them better and better and better. And they're comfortable to make mistakes, and they're comfortable to share that, because nobody's perfect, because that's the road, that's the hard journey. They have to communicate, they have to tell why they make mistakes. They have to feel comfortable, even excited doing so, because that's the way that they progress. And in this simple analogy of the band, it's obvious. Of course, you cannot learn guitar without making mistakes. But in a company, you're expected not to. And there's a lot of tools and processes that are built for people not to make mistakes and checkpoints and whatnot. But that's all wrong. That's all completely wrong. You can't learn if you're afraid of mistakes. You have to be able and have to be allowed to make mistakes, up to a certain extent, of course, that are not endangering life or health. But the mistakes, business mistakes, that's completely okay. You can recover and you learn from that. And that's hard.
It's a really great point about the environment, basically, because it's not just guitar, it's anything, it's anything. I mean, there's nobody that ever did anything great without mistakes, without failure. We're humans, right? We're not machines.
Yes.
So it makes a lot of sense. And there's just one more question I have, actually, the last question. It's a little bit outside of that spectrum, but I always like to ask it. Let's imagine now you're 80 years old and you're sitting in your rocking chair and you're looking back at your life and you're seeing everything that happened. Looking back, you see all the changes that the world has gone through and business has gone through. Looking back from that point, what would you love to see that would have changed from today to then?
This is a spectacular question, and it's a question that it's not so easy to answer. I think the one thing that I would have liked to have changed is that there would be more of those journeys of learning along the way, that you have more possibilities and more experiences that you learn along the way, and you spend more time of your life being in this environment where you have built this trust and have this like team feel of, yes, we can change something, let's change something. Be it the hobby, be it the cause you're very passionate about, or be it business. You have an idea, you have a great team, you feel being part of this team, and you go on this journey together. Yeah, and yes, sometimes it's hard, but therefore therefore makes the outcome more satisfactory. And you learn a lot about yourself and about people, and you feel much more fulfilled. I wish that would have happened more, or that would happen more than being very safe and in a comfort zone. And Switzerland is the place where it's very easy to be in a comfort zone, living your life relatively sheltered. Looking back, though, is this the best way to follow your dreams? Maybe not. Maybe a few more personal challenges would have been great.
I love that. I love that perspective. I love that perspective on the change. Also, the point you made about the challenge, because I really believe that as well. I really believe that the outcome or the result that you then celebrate and enjoy feels more valuable and enjoyable if the journey was not necessarily about problems and difficulties, but about learnings and growth as a human being. So I love that so much. So thank you so much, Vladimir, for being on the show and sharing some very, very great examples and some very, very in-depth knowledge and wisdom. So thanks a lot for being here and sharing all of this.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for inviting me.